Hello everyone. Welcome to Mashup Pitfalls, what to avoid and what not to do. My name is Steven Fresta, ThingWorx R&D. With me also is Anjan Ravi, also ThingWorx R&D.
I'm the product owner for Mashups.
And I'm in QA. We're going to give a talk on the general introduction to mashups and give you some pointers on what and what not to do. What to do and what not to do. Alright, so in the presentation today, we're going to start with an introduction, 5-minute demo, sort of Mashup 101, give you a really basic introduction to what a mashup is, how it works, how the pieces come together, how do you wire it, nothing complicated, and we'll follow that up with a demo of an actual put-together mashup, something we use sometimes in for demonstration purposes for our users to see what you can do with a mashup, sort of the full extent of things. Following that, we're going to get into what are some of the common oversights we see with users of the product. Some of the design choices they make that can sometimes be improved upon. Things like performance issues that sometimes crop up. We also have things like race conditions, which we'll get into, that can happen in your mashup that you want to try to avoid. We'll start with the initial design of those things, and we'll talk about what's wrong with it, and then we'll show you how it can be improved. In the midst of that, we'll have sort of how to establish a plan of action, how to get from point A to point B being the corrected design, which is much more efficient, generally speaking. We'll have a little review at the end and then some time for questions. Please hold your questions till the end. All right. So first we have a little introduction to mashups.
So we have three basic topics. So what is a mashup? How do you get to the builder? How do you create a mashup? And I will explain what the mashup builder is, what are the different parts of the builder. Then I will go into what are bindings, what are services, how do you add them, and then finally we'll show you a simple mashup, and then we can go to an actual demo. All right, let's switch to the Composer.
All right.
Please. So this is the Nextgen Composer. So we're running ThingWorx 8.3 here. Let's create a new mashup. An easy way to do is to go to the top, just type in mashups.
There it is.
And the first thing you want to do is select a mashup type. Let's go with the static here. So responsive is a responsive layout. So we have static widgets and we have responsive widgets. The difference is responsive widgets will fill the container. Static widgets occupy specific space. So we're going to go for the static tab. Let's give it a mashup name. So once we save it, we can flip to the design page. So this is the mashup builder. The pane on the left here, that's the section for widgets. So can you clear the button spot, please? So this is the list of widgets we have, the ones they can drag and drop onto the white canvas. The bottom left is going to hold all of your widget properties. So let's start with a simple example. So we want to showcase a grid with a lot of rows. So an easy way to do that is to drop the grid widget in.
You can see I just typed the grid in there and filtered it right away in the search box. Easy way to find them.
So when you select the grid, you can see the grid properties on the bottom left. So each widget has its own subset of different properties, so you can go through all of them. Now let's add a service. Service usually comes from things, so we have pre-made services, or you can have your custom services. Let's go pick up the generic thing. And let's get in a service called get implementing things. So what this service does is it will bring in an info table property, and you can display that in a grid.
Just once.
So let's hit done. So we need a way to trigger the service in runtime. So what we'll do is we'll add a button. So can you please add a button widget? And we are binding the clicked event of the button to the service. So what this does in runtime is when you click the button, it's going to trigger the service. And we need a way to display that. So let's drag all data and bind that to the grid. So let's save and view this mashup.
Just a quick little recap. All we did was button has a clicked event attached to it. We set that up so that when you click it, it's going to grab data, and that data is passing into the grid. That's all it does. Fairly straightforward.
So at runtime, you see that nothing is loaded yet because the button will trigger the service. So if you hit the button, we can see the grid displaying data. So this is a very, very simple mashup. Let's switch to one of the demos we have.
Sure.
The fourth tab.
Yeah.
So this is a nicer demo.
Yeah. So this is a fully functional mashup, an idea of something that you can use for, you know, just to kind of give you an idea of what you can do, all the stuff you can do with Mashup Builder. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes down to it, but it's sort of visually appealing, so we like to show it. This is a fictional brewery. We have sort of set up, you can see there's a bunch of, you know, brew tanks with various levels of beer in them. The idea is that this is a simulation of live data coming in from this brewery. We have things like temperature, we have levels. You can see we have over here, these are actually all just widgets, just like we dragged and dropped. We have a tab widget here with some charts displaying data in real time, and it should be refreshing. Another chart showing the light level, some detailed data with the grid widget. You can kind of dive into it if you wanted to. A gauge widget here, some cool graphics. Over here you have the Google Map widget, which is usually used for tracking things like, you know, for instance, here we have the trucks or, you know, their course they took. You can zoom in and out, fully interactive. A great thing to add to your mashup if you want to show something on a scale of distance or location. And of course, everything's interactive, so you can actually select things and have them actually update on the other widgets, which are all connected here. Some graphics showing temperature and humidity and that sort of thing. Again, just repeats of the same stuff. You can see I have a panel over here that kind of allows me to switch between the different views. We have weather, some more maps, collaboration. This is sort of like a blog and wiki. People can add comments, reviews. We have a slider widget. All sorts of things you can do with mashups, just to give you a general idea of some of the capabilities that the mashup has to offer.
So most of these you see, they're all out-of-the-box widgets, but they're just skinned differently. So every widget has a style definition property. That's where you go in and change colors, add images. So most of these are just out-of-the-box widgets.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now we're going to talk about some common mashup oversights. What we mean by that is some areas that can be improved upon. Common oversights people do when they're building mashups that tend to lend, an area for improvement.
So one of the most common things we see are race conditions. So race condition is something where you run multiple services at the same time, and it's trying to send one value to another input. So if you're trying to send 5 or 6 different outputs to one input, what does it take? It's going to get overwritten. So we have 2 simple cases here. So one is a service loopback. So what that means is that 2 services are triggering each other. So it's going to go into a loop. And the second one is a synchronous service call. So that's the first example I said. Multiple services triggering at the same time. What do you get out? So we have a mini demo for both of them.
I'm going to go back to my mashup here, or composer, I mean. Service loopback. Okay.
So
1 second. Let me grab the master version. Okay.
So we'll first show you in design and runtime, and then we'll get back to design time. So the first one is a service loopback. So what we have here is 2 grids, and we have a service. We have a button called break it, which is going to break this mashup. So click on the button. So we can see it's constantly loading. So what happened here is that it went into a loop. This will never end. It'll slowly fill up your memory. So we can look at what's wrong here. Reload the mashup once.
Yep. Back to design time.
So again, this is a very simple example, but when you're building complicated mashups, this is a simple oversight that we usually have. So we can see that the break it button is triggering a service called get config tables. So get config tables is part of the platform subsystem. This is a service I picked up. So it's going to get you the list of configuration tables we have in the platform subsystem. And the get config table service requires an input. So what I've done is I've bound the tables to the other service. So service invoke complete is something that runs only when your service is done, as the name states. So I have the service 1, which is tables service invoke complete, bound to the second one, and the second one bound back to the first one. So you can see that there's a loop created. So when the first service is done, it's going to trigger second service. When second service is done, it's going to trigger the first service. This will never end until your system crashes. And the other quick example we have is the first one. So click on get avatar. We've also had cases where we are improving the way services work, the way we can drag and drop. But right now, there is an easy way you can drag a event of a service and bind it to itself. So if you see the bottom pane, it'll show you that there's a loop. So that means it's wrong. It's bound to itself. So that is another common scenario we've seen. Right, let's go back to runtime.
Oh, runtime.
So the other one is it's called synchronous service calls. So in this example, I have one button that triggers 5 different services, and they are all inputting one value to a widget called the event router. The idea behind the event router widget is it takes multiple inputs and gives you one output. So in this case, there's 5 different services that's going to run at the same time. It's going to go to that widget, and we will get one output. The output is bound to the navigation widget. And the idea here is that it's trying to give you a mashup name, and the navigate widget will navigate to that mashup. So click on the button. So I have a value display widget at the top that shows you the name of the mashup. So in this case, when you click navigate, it's going to take you to that mashup. But the race condition problem here is if you click on the service again, you can see that we're getting a different mashup. So that is incorrect. You can never predict what you're going to get. So every time you click, there's a chance that you will get different mashups. Yeah. Let's go back to design time. So that is what we have here. So the button is going to trigger all 5 services here. The output of all of them is bound to the event router widget. That takes it sort of combines all 5. The way that that widget works is that it only takes in the last input. So there could be a delay every single time as to what the last input is. So we can never predict what the output is always going to be.
The events router, when used appropriately, is great for routing multiple events if you want to have them go into a single widget or display a single thing. But in this case, the race condition allows for the way it's set up such that it's going to be random every time. So okay.
All right, let's go back.
Yep. All right, so some of the other things we commonly see are basically just inefficient widget use. And what that means is using a widget which isn't the most appropriate for a certain situation. For instance, let me look at my mashup here. I have a little mashup set up here. As an example, this is the list widget, and what we're going to do is load a lot of data into it. Not a small amount of data, around 5,000 rows of data. And while the list widget can handle it, it doesn't do it smoothly. It doesn't do it, gracefully. It sort of kind of skips up on itself. So when I click the load button, you'll see even the loading of the data takes a long time to populate into the list widget. That's what's happening right now. It's going to take it a while. It should take it around 6 or 7 seconds to finish. And it's done now. And you can see clicking on it. I just clicked it there. It took about a second to highlight. It gets a little bit laggy the further you scroll down. And over here we also have the list widget in drop-down form. Clicking it, I clicked it. It's going to take a while to pop open. It's not really the greatest for the end user experience. They don't want to have interaction with a website like this that's kind of hard to do. It skips around, it lags. So there's solutions for that, which we'll get to later in the presentation.
All right, go back to the slides.
Oh, slides. Thank you.
So those two go hand in hand, both the inefficient widget use and performance problems. Because before we get into that, we just need to understand what the use case is. It's good that you can display all data, but there should be a specific reason or use case as to why you want to display 10,000 rows of data. A list widget, I don't think anyone will scroll through all 10,000 items. Maybe there are better ways to handle them, but there could be reasons too. So we have different widgets for each specific use case. Let's go to the next one. All right. Now let's go to the grid. The grid and the repeater.
Oh yeah. Okay, so let's go back to the grid. One more thing we want to show off. Same idea here. We have the grid widget. Again, we're loading a lot of data into it, and while the grid can handle it, there's multiple columns here. I think we have around 10,000 rows going in here. It starts to get a little bit. It has problems. See, it's not quite loading it. It takes a couple of seconds to load the next batch of rows. So there are solutions to that, which we will also talk about. Finally, repeater next. Okay, the repeater widget. I'll let Anjan handle this one actually.
All right, so the repeater widget was one of our popular widgets. So the idea behind the repeater is it repeats a mashup multiple times. So if you want to create a form with a text box and you want 10 text boxes you want to enter stuff in, creating 10 text boxes won't scale. And if you want to make multiple mashups that way, it's not a good way to do. So the repeater widget, so what you can do is you can create a simple mashup with one text box and then repeat that multiple times. So that was a great concept, but we have performance problems with this widget.
Click load data, and
this is loading about 3,000 rows.
Right.
So you can see it gets laggy when you scroll.
Yeah, it's the same, again, as Anja mentioned, it's the same mashup being repeated multiple times. Each instance of that mashup has a little bit of different data in it, which is great for that purpose, but can't really handle this amount of data. That we have a lot going into it, so it starts to get slow. It's not even loading. There we go. You know, it showed up finally. So, all right, that's our initial design. The next step, what you want to do, is establish a plan of action. How do I correct the problem? You know, say you have a mashup that has these issues. You know, it's a little slow. It has raised conditions or whatever. It has loopbacks. It has problems that you want to avoid. The first thing you really want to do is figure out how you're going to solve it, and that starts with establishing its use case. That means figuring out, you got to take note, you have to know ahead of time, you know, how much data am I going to have, how am I going to present it to people, how are they going to interact with it, how often is it going to be updated. These are all questions you got to ask yourself and know, because it depends. I mean, the widgets you use really depend on what you're going to do with the data and how you're going to interact with it. So once you've established that use case, that's when you start to convert it to a plan. You look at the widgets that the Mashup Builder offers, and you understand their strengths. You can see what they're used for and what they're not supposed to be used for. And you got to evaluate your requirements and compare them to the widgets that are available. Choosing the proper widget to suit your specific requirements is really important to having, you know, a smooth, well-oiled mashup. So, all right.
All right, so this one is revamping the design. So we're going to take a look at the grid use case and the repeater use case. So let's go to the revamping tab. So the grid you initially saw was the out-of-the-box grid widget. This is the grid advanced widget. So it's loading the same amount of rows, and you can see that there's a clear performance difference there. And it also has a bunch of features. So you can sort columns.
Sorting.
Yes. Yes, it is. So it's a separate extension you can download off the marketplace.
Marketplace.
Yes.
Yep.
You have a search. You can have search and filtering in this, so you can search for items in that search bar on the top left.
Yep. So I'm filtering by snow, this is just some weather entities. You can see it returned all the results that have snow. It's just a built-in filter. You can also accomplish this with the filter widget, but because it's built into the grid, it's a bit more efficient.
Some of the other cool features we have here is you can right-click and show hide columns. You can resize columns. And one of the other things we have is you can rearrange columns at runtime. So you can drag any one of them.
Move the image column over there. And one of the great features about this is that it's session dependent. So it creates a cookie. It saves your changes, the sorting, the search you added, whatever query you made, you rearrange the columns. It's saved for your session. And it will stay that way if you reload the page or come back to it later. So a user doesn't have to re-add all their filters again. If they change stuff, it'll be there.
And then we have the reset column in case something goes bad. So it can reset to the original state.
Puts it back to the way it was originally.
So that was the grid one. So for the repeater use case, we have something called the collection widget. The collection widget is essentially the repeater, but better than that. So again, you can see the performance difference between both of them because it's loading the same amount of rows. The collection has some additional features too. We have some ripple effects, or you can have a navigation widget built in. Right. So when you right-clicks on a cell, you can see that it pops with the menu. The menu has 3 different mashups in it, so you can navigate to another.
Yep. Okay. I think we're almost at the end, so yeah, you know what?
Yes.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so what you saw there was the Nextgen Composer. That's the
Nextgen also doesn't look like this.
So that's the Mashup builder. So this is the Nextgen Composer right here.
Yeah, but I think the color is a little bit, maybe it was gray. I'm not sure.
Do you have Flux on your system?
Because I thought you can switch it back to the old one too, right? Because in 8.2 you can say, okay, I want to work on the.
Yes. So in 8.3, Nextgen is the default composer, and in the version after that, 8.4, which is coming in November, December timeline, that will not have the classic composer.
Okay. Yeah, because 8.2, what we are using be kind of like, okay, switch it back to the old one. But the 8.3 released this month, or when was the 8.3 released?
8.3 was released, I think the 7th of June, a week and a half ago. So it should be available on the support site. You can download off that.
Okay, I can talk about that later. I have some questions.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Hi, you showed the collection as an alternative to the repeater. The use case I use the repeater for currently is like defining search parameters. So I need a way to pass basically values selected within the contained repeater back to the parent mashup. Does the collection support that? Right now I use like session attributes.
It does. So the collection has different events in it. So every cell has its own clicked, right-clicked, or I think there's about 6 different events for the collection. And based on the data you pass, if you have custom properties, each property will have its own changed event. So you can bind that directly. You don't need session parameters.
One of your demo show the session can remember what user choose. So if you go someplace else and come back, that sticky what your choice are.
Yeah.
How about the next login? So
yes. So it's actually user dependent as well. So it will save it. If you log in as the administrator and make these changes, log out, close your session, come back in as the administrator again, it will save those settings for that user.
For individual user, if they just want to build their own look and field, that will able to remember these choices?
On the same computer, so it stores it in a cookie. So as long as they're on the same computer and the same session, the same user, I mean, those settings will be there. And there actually is a setting to turn that off. If you don't want to do that, it will reset every time the mashup loads.
So you don't have to do anything with your user profile. The browser automatically does remember the setting.
Correct, yeah. It stores it in the browser cookie.
Wow,
so,
that's good.
Yeah.
So also this advanced grid.
Grid advanced, yeah.
Grid advanced, is that part of a release or extension?
It's an extension available on the marketplace, ThingWorx marketplace.
Okay.
So marketplace.thingworx.com, and you can find it there.
What's the prerequisite? Is it 8.3?
So the version.
Yeah. So Grid Advanced 3.06 is supported till 8.2. If you want the new Grid Advanced 4.0, that's 8.3 and above. What's new in 4.0 is editing. So the Grid Advanced didn't have editing capabilities before. With the new 4 release, we have edit support, and that's only available in ThingWorx 8.3 and above.
Okay, thank you.
It was 306.
So yeah, that's where you get them.
Sorry. Yeah, marketplace.
Hi, thanks for a very nice presentation, by the way. Do you have tips for additional widgets which are useful, like the advanced grid? I'm aware about advanced grid and we are using it, but there are some others, and let's say that now there is tons of the widgets, but something like the advanced grid, which you have the base capability, and then if you go for market solution, that one just improves your life significantly. Because the collection view is additional good example, so those are the 2 good examples. Do you have something like that on top?
Is there a specific use case you're looking for?
Well, we have problem that more difficult mashups we are creating, the slower they get. Yes. So the performance is the main issue. So those 2 things are the things which helped us. But I don't have any specific case now in mind. But is there something you would like from top of your head?
So so the more stuff you add and the slower it gets, a simple way to debug that is go through DevTools. So when we go to the network tab, it will tell you where it's taking the longest. So if it specifically points to a service, maybe we can look at and see what the service is doing. Is it waiting on something else? Maybe it's not bringing in a lot of data. Maybe it's waiting for another service to finish, or maybe it's waiting for an input. So we can start there to first see where the load time is. Then we can probably get into the widget side.
Okay, maybe a little bit different question. What we have problem is documentation of the mashups. You have a very nice view of the services, how they are connected if you click on the element, but if you want to go one step up to see like how the whole mashup is behaving, you cannot do that, right? You cannot really say what is the mashup, all of the services, and they're connected between each other. So, or is there something?
Aside from design time, you mean, like looking at the wiring the mashup? I don't think so. Above that.
So you want to look at the services that's connected specifically, or?
I want to go one step above. So right now I see if I click on the thing, on the button, it will tell me, okay, the button does trigger the service. But I would like to go like for the documentation purposes to say I like whole of my mashup does this thing. So if I go one step up, I would see like, okay, all of my buttons are going this directions and all of those things are going this directions. So basically one step above what we have in the visual over there.
So if you're talking about maybe if I want to see what all my buttons do, we don't have anything like that. But if you go to the runtime, you can actually see what services are getting called. So we have something called, can you bring up the show height debug log menu, please? So when you hit the show height debug info, that will bring you the other one. See?
Oh, sorry.
So this essentially tells you what's going on in the mashup to at least understand from a user perspective. So you can actually filter down to what services are getting called, how it's getting called, and where it's going. This is sort of a tree structure, but it still doesn't drill down to what the button does. But that could be an enhancement we could potentially add. So that's Control Alt F9. I think it's documented, so we have a shortcut for that.
Control Alt F9, yeah.
Yes.
It's not really related to, I mean, it's kind of related to Mashup too. So like when we are doing custom widget development, so we are going into Eclipse. So in order to test it, you have to make a package and then put it in ThingWorx and see whether it's working or not. I mean, is there tools within Eclipse to kind of test it? Because then it's just so painful.
So we have an extensions debugging extension. So you can actually debug extensions with Eclipse. But if you're purely talking about UI, that you need to import into ThingWorx. But if it's a platform extension, you can use the debugging tool. So it depends on what the extension does. Is it a UI extension?
It's a widget. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a mashup widget, right?
Mashup, right.
So what is the way to test it? Because when you're developing in Eclipse, there's no way you can tell that's going to work. I mean, like it compiles fine, everything, but now what?
Right.
So this is like becomes a terrible import-export exercise.
We have a debugger. I just need to check if it goes through the mashup side, but I know it does the platform side of things because you can debug in Eclipse itself. We can get back. Actually, you can stop by the dev zone. Maybe we can take a look at it after.
Any other questions?
All right. Well, thank you. Oh yeah, he was making fun.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.